want to introduce Jeremy Drury. Jeremy's connecting prediction to production with the industrial Internet of Things. With his ability to connect vision and strategy to field-level operations, he's deployed successful, connected, fluid power, and IIoT solutions into the global marketplace and has been a featured keynote speaker at the National Fluid Power Association's annual conferences, as well as the Reliable Plant Conference, Machinery Lubrication Conference, the Sensors Expo, Sensors Midwest, and TechSolve's annual Production Solution Showcase. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you. So again, my name is Jeremy Drury. I think it's important before I dive too much into this to give you a little bit of my background, and I want to start with some knots, okay? So I am not an engineer by trade. I am not in data science, not a data analyst, I'm not an IT manager. I can also promise you I'm not in sales or marketing as well, so you don't have to rush up out here. I have nothing to sell you today. But here's where I think we can all find some common grounds, okay? So what I do consider myself is a context engineer. And so what do I mean by that? So we believe that the distance between people and their problems is measured by context, right? If any of you have ever had anything go awry, whether it's equipment, a customer, and you have to either directly report to that customer or to a boss, what do we immediately do? We start building that story in our head, don't we? You know, I want to try and find as much information as possible to CYA through and through, right? I'm constantly out hounding for more information to do that. And I believe that is where, honestly, we can pull a lot of value from the IoT. Because the old adage is, data doesn't lie, but production managers do, right? So the more information that we can pull in, the better. So with that, let's get started, okay? So a little bit more about me, because I think we actually need to hone in on what I'm going to mean by efficiency on this. And something, the more you would get to know me, I suffer from what we call process bias, okay? And I'm sure some of you in this room are with me on that. I'm going to go ahead and make some assumptions here. I'm going to split the room. There's two types of people in this room. There are the one type that, I'm getting pretty polar here. So there's one type that came to this conference, didn't download the app. You got off the plane, you're coming to check out the show, you're open, you're chill, you know, you're just going to go and whatever the show takes you, you're just going to go and experience the show, as you may. And then there's probably the other side that you downloaded the app weeks ago. You have every day mapped out. You know exactly what customers, or clients or whomever that you are trying to see. And more than likely that same group, there's probably a part of you that's only going to be about a half to 3/4 present during this presentation because you're already thinking about what else is going on later today, what you're having for lunch, what you're doing tomorrow. I suffer from the latter. I'm married, and you can only imagine how that affects my marriage on any given basis because more than likely you're going to have one or two conversations with me. One where I'm hyper present because I'm interested in the conversation. It's great. I'm focused in. And there's another one where if you talk to some of my coworkers, catch me in the middle of a process and have a conversation with me. It's something like, yeah, great. Yeah, yeah, awesome. Cool, great. I'm just going to keep walking over this way. And there's a bit of a tax in that. Simply because it's, you know, I'm so wrapped up into what's ahead and what's coming. And maybe that's a good reason that I'm in the space that I'm in. And so where does that actually tie into what we're going to be talking about today? Well, I believe that a lot of our inner worlds are constantly tormented by process bias. We're constantly trying to strategize and think and pull more information into our lives to create more time, space, and mind share for us, right? Because the more time we're spending trying to work and solve through things, it's that we're being less efficient with our time. So, you know, when I think about true efficiency, it really I want to help us zoom out today. Okay, so if you go back to what I originally led with, kudos to the people that actually write the mathematical equations for efficiencies, for actual equipment efficiencies and all of that. So I want to get out of the micro and get into the macro. And we have to be there in order for us to really understand where the IoT can help with that. So the bigger picture that I'm trying to paint today is around waste, right? So efficiency ultimately kind of gets into overall equipment effectiveness, overall time spent, time gained from dealing inside of your equipment. And so how does that translate to our world and our IoT? And so, as a quick snapshot for IoT diagnostics, we have 50 plus years background, obviously not in IoT specifically, but in fluid power. So understanding that world hyper well, and then really got into the overall sensing and network connectivity piece around 2016, 2017. And the more that you get out and you go to, different talks on IoT and all that, there's a lot of effort being spent on these kind of like top-down crowning models. And what I mean by that is, I'm a company, I'm not going to mention any names, but I'm going to put a sandbox on top of your organization, and I'm going to say, I've now enabled you to do anything and all things. You've got the platform in there, you just got to get it all connected up. And the problem with those is it makes some gross assumptions. It makes assumptions that we are currently underutilized. I don't know how many times I've talked to executive level, where they're just like, oh, Jim from IT can do that. Yeah, go and actually talk to Jim from IT and see how busy he is. He does not have time to set up a whole network infrastructure for IoT inside of a plant. And so we have actually found a lot more traction from a bottom-up approach by solving very specific and systemic, candid problems that people face all day, every day, whether that's with pumps, motors, inside their lubrication, rotating equipment, filtration, anything like that, because you can level with someone immediately on that, right? Go and ask a person who doesn't have connectivity or IoT in their environment how their pumps are doing. Without any type of data intelligence, they can only answer that question one of two ways. Their pumps are either working or they're not. But we know there's a whole operational chasm between working and not. And that's where the IoT can really start to gain some ground early on with customers when it comes to efficiency. That's not me on the right. So, big fan of Mythbusters, watched it growing up, a lot. And so I think it's just important for me just to take a microsecond here and just acknowledge that I realize I'm walking into a bit of a hornet's nest today talking around efficiency. The word efficiency may be more charged language than artificial intelligence, than predictive maintenance, right? I mean, we've been talking about efficiency for a long time now. And so I acknowledge in our, what do we call it, the post-truth era that we're in here, that we all can each have our own truth. And so, right, wrong, or indifferent on that, I'm going to give you guys my approach again today when I'm talking around efficiency and thinking about from a systemic standpoint. So again, kind of getting out of the scientific models and more into technology-driven ecosystems when it comes to driving efficiency. So this is one of my favorite visuals to scroll out for organizations that we work with when it comes to where they stand in the IoT. Because sometimes all that anger, you can just go to town on a whiteboard, just do a bunch of squiggly lines, right? And where are we? And for a lot of organizations, ourselves included not too long ago, we land in the chaos. I would tell you right now, I don't think a single organization globally is outside of the chaos of IoT yet. But I think you start to see the chaos fade a little bit depending on how you're positioning yourself. So, bit of a rhetorical check-in with yourself at this point. In the chaos of IoT, where are you at as far as positioning? How are you positioning either on your own factory floor, in your own assets, or if you're in, if you serve, supply, distribute, or whatever, how are you going to continue to leverage or begin to leverage the IoT to drive your business forward? Okay. So, you got from the introduction that I do this quite a bit. And so we get around and we hear, a lot on, how the industry's doing. And so from my personal standpoint, this is kind of where I see the current state of the industrial IoT, right? So the little kind of pencil pushes us to, I think we're somewhere between proving it and scaling it, right? I don't think the majority of us at this point is still trying to be in the hype of it, right? I think we've gotten to the point where, okay, we know this is going to impact our business. We understand mostly how it could work inside our practices. And now it's into vendor prove it on our own shop floors or in our own fleet equipment or anything like that. And we're still in this, there's the phrases like pilot purgatory. I don't get down with that. My thing is pilot what you need. It's better to understand and start from the right foot than go willy-nilly and experiment on a bunch of different things and see what sticks. That's not going to drive anything forward. So spend the time and the effort to get things how you want. And I do see more organizations that have made initial deployments, and they're starting to figure out, okay, how do I actually scale this to add additional value? And so hopefully we will see, likely in late 2020, as we get into 2021 and 2022, that we'll be having conversations more around optimization, and we can kind of get back into talking about things like big data and how to convert that into smart data to help systems. So hopefully, somewhere everyone in here in some capacity is somewhere either getting from the learn it to prove it or getting from prove it to scale it there. But I do acknowledge that we are still really early in this process. I think we're like chapter 2 on the IoT at this point. And so does it really feel fair that I can come in here today and start talking about IoT and efficiency? Because for any of us in here who's actually tried to put effort into the IoT, it feels hyper inefficient right now. I mean, this is the amount of teams and contracts and people and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's true. I think that's something to wrestle with. But what I want to do as far as the spirit of the talk today, when it gets back to actually how to master fluid power efficiency with the IoT, I believe we're a lot closer than we think. And so instead of this whole idea of being worlds apart, my goal is to get everyone into more of an orbital model. And so what I mean by that is our world in heavy industry, light industry, for so long, it has forced us into silos. We drive value by going vertical, right? We want to pull everything in and go as vertical as possible, and so we can try and make as much money as possible. In practice, I get it. In theory, that really flies into the face of what the true IoT is actually trying to achieve with more an ecosystem. And so think of everything you know historically around silos, around verticality, and my goal is to perhaps at least open the dialogue with you about shifting to hub and spoke, shifting you to ecosystem, more being nucleus with surrounding elements around you. That's what I want to try and get to you today, because I believe if you have a lasting imprinted image in your mind when you leave this presentation, if you leave with one thing, leave with this image in your head. I didn't design this. This is fortunately this is out there. And the reason I want you to think about this is there are 2 ways to monetize the IoT as a part of this visual diagram. One way is to be that big, bright planet there in the middle and have a whole world revolving around you of other end users, partners, suppliers, etc. And that's possible. That's possible for even a small organization like ours, which I'll tell you about. The other opportunity is to think of it as nodes. How many of these nodes in the system does your business touch or can provide value to? And so the more that you start thinking about everything that's spiraling around you, instead of the traditional linear point-by-point value chain where you're actually more just concerned about the people immediately on your right and your left, now you can actually sit back and focus and think about the whole world collectively from beginning to end. That actually never ceases because it's just constantly moving and absorbing new data and driving value there. And I believe that it's not just my goal to get you here, but ultimately it is the overall IoT's goal is to get us into this space. Okay. All right, so I've gone macro, I've gone theory at this point, and I want to start to drive into practicality. And so how do we put steps and miles into what I just pitched and posed, right? It doesn't just happen overnight, but it requires effort. And it requires strategy and vision and openness and partners and all the icky stuff like that. But let me get into this, and maybe it'll change your mind just a little bit. Okay. So my belief on how you ultimately get into more of an ecosystem type of model for smart efficiency, it goes back to the earlier slide that I had. How are you monitoring specific assets? How are you monitoring systemic processes inside your organization? How are those 2 things interacting with each other? And then ultimately, how are you generating the network effects to ultimately get the most value of that? Because if everything's connected. And so, the overall efficiency equation for, we're not talking the overall efficiency equation for a pump at this point. We're not talking about power in versus, over power out times 100 or anything like that. This is my equation. Fortunately, my equation is a hell of a lot simpler than the math required for a lot of your traditional efficiency equations. So let's get to, when I talk about specific efficiency monitoring and systemic efficiency monitoring, I want to focus on 3 specific categories to achieve that. So I want to start by talking pumps, okay? So in the world of pumps, I feel like that's something that the majority of us in here can rally around. You know, I would love to say that historically, I don't think that's a fair assumption because we get out enough and see just absolutely atrocious and laughable maintenance and reliability practices. But traditionally, if you wanted to see how a pump is working or not, you go and grab a bucket, a hose, and a stopwatch, right? It's a bit of a gig to actually check my flow rates and overall efficiency and all of that. Just what you have to do. Use the tools at the time to measure as much information as possible. I'm not going to lick my finger at this point because I've been touching this thing, but someone's got a pad of paper there and they're taking notes on it and like that, and that pad of paper goes somewhere. Long lost somewhere like that. And so, is there an opportunity to get beyond that world and have a more harmonious, connected interface? And I believe that there is. And so, everything that you hear me talking about today is possible, is available, and can happen. I'm not talking pie in the sky future scenarios at this point, right? So imagine now that instead of just a traditional pump, you have a smart pump or you have a smart device connected to a pump, okay? And let's say that smart device is generating information for you in real time about that pump down to the pump's volumetric efficiency or its efficiency, hypothetically or in reality, coming out of the case drain of an axial piston pump. That's what this specific model is about here. And so if you, say manufacturer recommends that at any given time, you should be at an 85% VE or higher coming out of the case drain of an axial piston pump, right? That is really important information for you to know when it comes to the overall work and efficiency that your pump is trying to give to you. But it's really hard to actually get that information available without having and deploying some type of real-time connected interface to go along with that. So we'll run a scenario that now that reality is possible on how even a single data point can drive a lot of macro efficiency effects across an organization and an ecosystem. So let's say you suddenly, one of your pumps starts to trend at a 78% VE out of a case drain. So now you're operating at 7 points below, what the manufacturer recommends. And with today's IoT, you're going to get an alarm or a notification about that. And so now you're going to have this information that says, wow, I'm operating below efficiency right now. And we all know that production's not easy. Production is hard, in whatever capacity that you're in. And you have demands on you to make sure that pump can do the work that it's set out to do, that you likely have money tied into that pump being able to do its work. And so now that you understand that it's operating below efficiency, you got to start thinking about some decisions that you need to make. Are you still satisfied with the level of production that needs to happen from that piece of equipment today? So you can start to change production decisions in real time. But as I get to that bottom base of the triangle there, so, first step, you're getting that single piece of information on a smartphone, on a sexy dashboard, and somewhere in a facility, on a tablet. If you're on vacation in Fiji and you get jazzed out by understanding how your equipment is doing, great. You're going to get it there too. I don't recommend that. But so you have this piece of information here now, right? And so what do you do with it, right? Because I think what's really important to take away from this is how you use the data. Or else you're going to get a lot of so whats from your customers. So what that you're giving me this piece of information? What are we doing with it? And so again, on this single piece of information, well, I can go back now historically and think, oh, it's interesting. I wonder what's causing this efficiency dip in my pump. We come from, we come from a background that's more lubrication focused. So our first stop is always the stories in the oil. Start with the oil. How's the fluid chemistry? How has that changed? And so it's an immediate branch from a very specific piece of monitoring to a systemic piece of monitoring, right? And so how am I now seeing my overall fluid health? And is it in the right condition? What's my contaminant levels like? What's my conductivity? Is my permittivity tracking right? Is my additive packages where they should be with this? Is that's what driving that down? So immediately you have something to do with that data. You're not just staring at it with nothing to do. You have an immediate baked in action there. Okay? And then so let's say you do, and you can deploy whatever it is to deploy, services, products to help clean that oil. But it doesn't stop there, because now if you're on the production side or fleet management or whatever it can be, you can actually start making more operational decisions, right? Well, am I having the same issue across my plant? And so now you can take that piece, that 78% VE, and if you're looking at the same data across a whole fleet of pumps, now you can start to say, well, how is this comparing fleet-wide? Is this a fleet-wide issue across my plant, or is this locked into here? So now you've gone from an asset-specific to a systemic type of look in the fluid quality to now you're in total asset, whole production system-wide. So you're getting more and more higher up in the vision and the strategic decisions that you're making, again, with just this single point of data. And it gets even bigger than that. So let's say it goes beyond you at this point. So your corner office at your facility, and now they're starting to wonder, well, if you're in a multinational type of organization, well, why is production down in Guadalajara versus Munich or something like that? And so now it's someone on a corporate level, now they're starting to look at, well, why is my overall pump efficiency down in my production practices? And I'm not making that up because I heard that real time from a large plastics injection molding customer that we were working with. They had 44 sites worldwide, and their number one problem organizationally, more than talent, more than finances and all that, was pump failure. You've got to be kidding me that if your biggest organizational problem worldwide is pump failure, that good for them because I think that's solvable. But man, there's a lot of problems that you could have. That must be pretty intense for them because we all know how important pumps are. And so how they would do it, it was literally like the Pump Avengers would meet once a week. They would have a weekly standing meeting, video conference. What are your pumps doing in your facilities? And what are your pumps doing in your facilities? I mean, you want to talk about like grossly inefficient waste of people's time. This is like happening in real time, like multi-billion-dollar like plastics injection molding place. And they're literally going around and being like, what are you learning? And what are you doing? All that stuff can go away if someone's just sitting in a corner office looking at real-time data. They can now say, okay, well, I see what they're doing now and what this is doing, and they can use all that to now make company-wide decisions. And so again, all this started from a singular piece of efficiency data at this point. And then we ultimately get to the very top of the pyramid, which gets us to an interesting piece of monetization as well. Because inside the organization, it may not be the only people that care or want to see that data. And we can have data governance conversations at the side or whatever that needs to be, but track with me in this scenario. What if it's actually the pump? The pump itself? Shouldn't the OEM of that pump, shouldn't the manufacturer of that pump know that it's just not quite working as it should be in the application environment that it's in? And so what we see with the IoT is the more that we generate that information back to the OEMs, long term, they can continue to engineer out why the stuff fails in the first place. Because especially if we're in a manufacturing environment or we are an OEM and we make equipment for the field, it's my background, I come from it, we spend infinite resources and time in controlled lab environments to get products exactly how we want them to then send them out to the Wild West. It literally makes no logical sense to me at this point how much time and effort we spend to perfect and then send it out into just complete chaos in an operational environment. And they just don't do a good job. We just don't do a good job of actually getting out into the field and understanding how our equipment works in the highly varied environment of traditional off-highway or factory floor level stuff. And so the more that we can generate that post-installation information back to them, the smarter they're going to be around how their products work inside of that. And same if you are in the service supplier distribution field. Because honestly, like I can tell you that maintenance staffs are getting cut and production increases are going up. So people are being asked to do more with less constantly. And so people are going to be looking for co-pilots and companies to come alongside them. And if you have access to this information, it's the old Watson commercial with the elevator, right? Where you show up at the front desk and the front desk person's like, why are you here? You're like, your pump's about to blow. And they're like, oh. And then you've solved that problem before it's about to happen. So there's a lot of ways at the very tip top of that pyramid to inject and sit side by side with customers. It almost reminds me of a rally car. If anyone follows rally cars in here, the props are more on the co-pilot who's actually telling the people when to turn, not the actual driver. I mean, kudos to the driver, but someone's out there saying, hey, hard turn, hairpin coming in, a mile and a half or whatever that is. Customers are desperately looking for that right now. And I mean that sincerely. My little team opened up a consulting division last year because of how many companies are being like, we don't know how to do IoT. So if you are in the spot where you can come alongside companies, they're asking for it right now. I promise you that. So that's in short of how to deal with the specific asset of the pump side of things. And so now let's maybe tickle a little bit inside something a bit more systemic, like filtration, because everybody loves to talk about filtration, right? Big eye roll, because historically, people just suck, frankly, at filter PMs. It's on some weird cadence, 6 months, whatever it may be. And that's typically how filters get replaced if they do. Turkey baster, the mechanical turkey baster alerts, pretty much boy who cried wolf at this point. We had one customer who got so tired of being harassed by the mechanical turkey basters, he just stopped paying attention to them. Not a good idea. Had like a $8 million downtime because they had like 4 collapsed filters, just domino effects, and shut down like half of their production equipment, based on that. So, because again, filter PMs are just they're not fun. They take up time. They always seem to kind of, fall down the list. And so, is there a way that, getting into overall filtration efficiency can back into an overall kind of master fluid power efficiency type of scoring? And so again, crude lines here, but a typical life cycle of a filter, right? As it reaches efficiency, it continues to, collect particles, block particles, and then over time, it just loses its ability to do that. It gets less and less effective, and then you get a pretty harsh knee, and then it ceases to be effective before you need to go into bypass, right? And then so typically, most PMs happen like this, right? Well, the filter's not working as it should. It's not been working for a while as it should, so we're going to schedule that on the next PM, right? And so the line is somewhere beyond where it needed to be replaced, and in some ethereal space, they've created for themselves an inefficiency gap in their filtration practice that they probably could have replaced it, months ago, but they waited to do that because they're affixing it to their PM. The other side is, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do my next PM. So since I'm doing my next PMs, I'm just going to go ahead and replace all my filters right now. It's fair. I get it. It's time management at that point. So then on the flip side of that equation, you're going to have filters that probably didn't need to be replaced, and you're now leaving efficient filters. You're going to throw them away, and that doesn't help either. And so now you've created inefficiency gaps on both sides of that. And so what if you had smart filtration, right? What if your filter was actually able to tell you at the exact moment, or, maybe 10 or 5% before it reached peak efficiency? So then suddenly, you're not even worrying about mechanical turkey basters or anything like that, but legit, the filter is telling you exactly, I need to be replaced right now. You get the alert. Again, you're back on vacation in Fiji. You get to delegate that to someone on staff. They're like, hey, this filter, this group of filters need to be replaced. And so again, at this point, you were replacing the filter at the right time every time. And so we've already started to see this generate at least 33% cost savings for organizations that are deploying, system-wide filtration management with the IoT. The other piece of this, again, because I'm going to always tie back to OEMs and service and distribution supply companies in here as well. If you're an OEM, you should be really freaked out by this, or you should get in on this, right? Because now we have, in essence, empowered the end user to say, hey, your filter doesn't work as well as you said it did. Why isn't it working this way? And so now, there's more pushback from the end user because they have more information. They have more power at this point to have those kind of conversations. Secondarily, we've seen customers express interest for those distribution companies or service and supply companies to just take over their filtration business for them. Because now if you're getting all the information in real time, the service company is getting the notification and they're going to come in and do all the filter replacements. And ding, 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 you're not just there to do filter replacements, are you? Your eyes are constantly open on what else you could do for that customer while you are serving them. And so there's great values and efficiencies that you can reach across this whole piece. And the last one's probably the most hairy scary when it comes to lubrication, right? I got in a funny debate / conversation around what is fluid efficiency with a really big oil marketer not too long ago, and it can be a bit of an eye roll, right? I mean, because what actually is fluid efficiency? And we can hack that up as many ways as we want to, but for the sake of this presentation, what I want to get to is your fluid working for you as well as it should? It's a work statement at this point, right? And so if you track with me on that, we'll be able to navigate the remainder of the slides on this here at this point, okay? So this is not fluid efficiency, right? So now, benefit of the doubt again, we know that there's a lot of people who just don't take good care of their equipment. That good maintenance and reliability practices is catching leaking fluid in a bucket and pouring it back into tank. And just hoping that's gonna work. Hey, I didn't lose any fluid. It didn't go on the floor, I mean, we've seen people use pea gravel for filtration. I mean, you think of it and it's, and sorry if I'm actually calling anyone out specifically in here. I don't intend to do that. But, and so what happens though is you get sensor manufacturers. There's been really good fluid quality, fluid health type of sensors on the market for a while now. Some of the companies could have been here this week, but they chose not to. And so there's always opportunities to gain more information around your fluid health. If you're in that space, you probably even use laboratories, right? So you take a fluid sample or a color patch test and you send it to a lab. Some days go by, you get your report back, and it may be this like beautiful, like 10-page report that's really intimate around your fluid health, and you're looking for that one line. Am I good or bad? Then, not helpful. Now, I will say laboratories are our friends. IoT is not out to replace the test oils of the world or laboratories or anything like that, because we're going to get more real time. So we're basically taking video while they're taking really high definition pictures of the fluid, right? But the problem is you can't just look at one piece of that fluid. You may think that, we're a big believer that everyone's baseline should be clean, cool, and dry. You can keep contaminants out, keep water out, and keep your fluid at the right temperature. It's a pretty darn good spot to start with, right? But depending on what industry you're in, you may need to understand, again, more about your additive packages. You may need to understand about metal ingress into your fluid, oxidation, all of those different things, right? And so you can't really be efficient if you're just hypothetically looking at contamination. You can't be fluid efficient if you're just hypothetically looking at viscosity. You need to be able to pull in as many pieces as possible. Because I go back to what did I talk about at the beginning? Context engineering, right? And so you have to be able to connect as many dots as possible. Because if again, things that go system wide, your lubrication touches a lot of stuff in your facilities or on your vehicles or everything like that. And so you're going to want to know you're going to want to connect as many dots as possible, right? So that's a very brief take, purposely so, just to start to prime you to think around when it comes to fluid efficiency, do I have enough information to understand is my fluid actually doing the work and as good of work as it could be inside of my system? And so we're through the first two parts of my equation there as far as, specific asset monitoring, and then we got into systemic, and both of those things are tracking really well together. And then so we get into this maybe more kind of harder to define thing of network effects. And what do I mean by network effects? In essence, what I'm just going to talk about here is more of what we just call a data flywheel, right? It's just one of those things about momentum, it started years ago with Facebook, or cell phones, right? How valuable was the first cell phone? Who's actually making any calls with the first cell phone, right? And the cell phone got more and more valuable over time, the more people that use it. No different with IoT and sensors and all of that. And so what I start to think around, but I want to transition that not so much as data aggregation, but more on the narrative that starts to change when you have more efficient data coming in and you have a bigger, better, broader picture on how to manage your equipment, fleet, factory floor, whatever it may be. And so, an easy visual that I walk through here, we talk about, again, our secret ingredient. I mentioned a couple times this whole idea and concept of context engineering. The cool thing about context engineering, it's not a degree. Anyone can be a context engineer. If I can be one, you can be one at this point. And so let's run through a scenario, right? And that text is pretty small, so I'll help to read it for you. And so most often than not, a good baseline to start with is just around changes in the operational environment. We're working with an automotive company that they do a lot of, sand in their metalworking and whatever, and they're convinced that in the summertime, the Midwest gets humid. We're in Cincinnati, that in the summertime, the humidity directly impacts their manufacturing, right? And what's also cool about the IoT is you can settle scores and settle debates because there's a staff guy who's convinced that it absolutely impacts his production, and his boss says, bullcrap. I don't believe it. Feels too foo-foo for me. Well, now the IoT can actually jump in and solve that, right? You can API, you can pull local weather data right into a system, right? And you can start to do some RH, some relative humidity sensors on the roof of the building, at the ceiling, and down to the asset. And then suddenly, in a couple of seconds, you actually have a measured moisture ingress curve into that system. And now you can settle that debate right then and right there. But it's one of those that everything starts, the whole point of this is to get smaller and smaller. You got to start big, right? And so understanding that if you start to see changes in your overall operational environment, how is that how's that affecting everything else? And that could go from personnel, that could go to the production requirements, fab maintenance and reliability, partners, etc. So start there. And then let's say you do find some anomalistic change in your operating environment. And then you are going to overall, again, start to look at your system reliability, right? What does your PM plans look like? What are you, how are you handling your lubrication? Are you actually monitoring for anything vibration on your rotating equipment? Are you looking at overall impact on your commodity needs like air, electric, different things like that? And so, again, you stack those on top of each other and you start to get more and more insightful information. But on that scenario, so you see changes in your operational environment, you call a spade, and you say, okay, maybe my maintenance and reliability practices aren't as good as they could be. And then ding, 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 you will start to see degradation in system-wide fluid health. You're probably going to see contaminants start to ingress into your fluid or metals or whatever. I guarantee it that you're going to start to see those things. And so now you're like, crap, my fluid's not working as it should be. What's coming down line for that? Well, if you've been following the story here, you're probably now going to start to see if you got a bunch of particles and metals and contaminants floating around in your fluid, your filter health's going to go woo, because it's going to touch everything at that point. Well, now if you're also monitoring and you understand that your filter health and you're looking at the efficiencies of that and you start to see your efficiencies of your filter degrade and a spike, guess what comes next? You're going to start to see, it's going to be suspenseful at this point. Okay. You're going to start to see degradation in your specific assets. Guarantee it. Pumps are going to start to degrade a lot faster. You're maybe going to start blowing shaft seals if you're not careful because you may get into an overpressurization scenario, motor health, whatever it may be. You're going to start to see those downline issues in your specific assets. And then if you're monitoring it, you can get ahead. And then, so now we've been in the meat, and then we're going to zoom back out a little bit. And so now we're actually thinking about, well, crap, if I've got changes in my overall operational environment, if I have poor maintenance and reliability, my fluid sucks, my filtration's failing me, my pumps are starting to go, maybe I should just quit. No, that's not the right answer to that. But you would need to zoom back out and be like, man, from a monetization standpoint or a cost control standpoint, how much is my overall system throughput actually suffering at this point? How involved are my customers? If you're responsible for putting fleet equipment into the field, how are they handling this? Are they seeing overall dips in production? Are they seeing more equipment come back in for service or fail in the field or anything like that? And so if everything is working harder, I guarantee you those production inefficiencies are going to bleed you dry. It's like death by a million cuts at this point, right? And so you're going to probably start to see commodity loss. So again, air, energy. We work with a couple of big European companies. I know we're blessed with what seems to be pseudo-free energy here in the U.S., but for, more global side, energy is pretty pricey. So it's going to be more and more important to, your ISO 50001 energy standards and all of that. So all that's going to be really important to start maintaining and understanding costs. And so what we've painted here is a really sad picture, but a picture of reality for a lot of our companies, right? A lot of us wouldn't be in here if we didn't have people that need help across their entire system. And every single one of these points is an opportunity to drive efficiency with the IoT. Because here's the other big reality check that I want to offer today. And I actually love to see the age spread in the audience on this, because a lot of what we see, especially when we focus on the factory floor, is a lot of the machine whisperers and subject matter experts, they're retiring, they're phasing out, good for them because they've kept stuff up and running for a long time. And we haven't been able to replace them quite at the speed that we want to, and need to, frankly. And so what we have now is a pretty big talent gap. And I'm a millennial. It's fine. I'll admit it. I'm a crust millennial though, so I get it. I've had to work for what I need. I just don't expect it. But we've got a generation of people that get this a lot more than what a machine sounds like when it needs repaired. And so the more that this information is real time, you don't need to be a machine whisperer to better understand the full narrative, what's happening here, right? Because if I give you an example like this, and this is just one of our examples. Again, there's a plenty of these out and available right now. It just makes sense to talk about ours. But imagine a scenario like this, where, we're running a couple of different failure events, in our booth, but, we're running things like, again, hydraulic power unit issues, heat exchanger failures. And so what we'll get to is you'll start to notice alerts happening in real time going to red. So I'm giving you an example of, crap, one of your pieces are starting to fail, and then you're going to start to see, and then this is, if you don't do anything about it, this is going to fail, and then this is going to fail, and then this is going to fail. And you're going to give insights and information around there saying, okay, well, to prevent that from happening, here's what you need to do. And again, if you're either an OEM or on the service and supply side, so much value to be driven in right there because you can be the expert for the customer in this space. You know, imagine if a customer experiences an alert in a situation like this and they're immediately notified to contact you. Or even you are the ones that are actually supplying the insights and information back to them. Saying, hey, I noticed that this is happening in your system. Have you looked at this? Have you considered this? Because one of the things that we continue to see over and over and over in all of our earliest pilot deployments and as we scale is failures will happen regardless. But where customers struggle is they don't understand what we call the degradation branch, right? Because what we have to do because of our being overutilized on the shop floor or in fleet management is issue happens and we scramble like crazy to solve whatever immediately caused that issue. But we know there's a whole spider web of upstream, downstream situations that actually cause that failure in the first place, right? If a seal blows, does anybody hear it? No. If a seal fails, and if you don't have intelligence, it takes so much time and effort and mind space to try and figure out why that failed in the first place. And with sensing technology, I could potentially drive 100 potential opportunities of why that seal failed down to about 3. And if I add more context into that environment, I bet you I can pinpoint down to the exact reason why it failed in the first place. And now I've given that employee the most precious resource back to them, which is time. And again, so if you can drive in there and create time and insights for these customers, you can ultimately help them and help yourselves master fluid power efficiency. So again, feel free to come by and see us because we have a couple of these experiences running real time. And so again, what I ultimately want to get to here as we are almost wrapping up, pulling it all together here, is again that shift from silo focused, the world is only what I can offer, to ecosystem, solar system. So think about all the nodes and different parties that are represented in your orbit, whether it's end users, whether it's partners, whether it's applications, systems, networks, sensing companies, sensing partners, and then you can down to the specifics, right? System health, asset health, fleet health. Do you know where the stuff is at? Does the customer know where the stuff is at? And I believe that efficiency is a fallacy until at least 75% of those are being provided in real time. Because how on earth can you consider, if efficiency boils down to waste, the amount of extra time, the extra output, the mental output that we've got to put into helping solving ethereal problems becomes a reality, right? I'm going to oversimplify here, but in life, there's really 2 types of problems that come up. There's mysteries to be solved, and there's puzzles to be put together. And with the IoT, a lot of this stuff pivots from mysteries to be solved because those take a long time. Those take a lot of effort. You got to figure all that out. To just puzzle pieces that need to be put together, where all the pieces are on the table, and you're just helping the customer put everything together. Or if you're on your own factory floor environment or in your own fleet management, you now have all the pieces, and so your time is not spending asking big ethereal questions, but just putting the right pieces in the right place. So really let that sink into you and ask yourself and pull yourself into, how will my company get here? And how close to the epicenter can I get with my company? How many people can I get to orbit around me where I can provide value to them? Quick case example where we're doing that specifically is we're working with a large power generation company. Again, transparency, we're a 9-person team from Cincinnati, right? We're working with a massive power generation company, helping them solve steam turbine issues. Steam turbines are expensive when they break. And as a part of that, so we have solutions deployed on that, but it's not just us and the customer. It's not a one-to-one relationship anymore. The oil marketer, the lube supplier, the additive supplier, they're all involved, and they're watching all this data happen in real time. Corporate research bodies, third-party research bodies are involved at this point because they're trying to understand how the system is failing, why it's failing, and they're trying to report back out to the world, hey, this is some good things to know around how to prevent these issues. Academia is involved in it. So consultants, CLSs, tribologists, because they're hungry to gain new insights. Because remember I was talking about with the lubrication efficiency up there, we've got like 16 different sensing metrics that we're measuring as a part of this fluid. And it's amazing what you can start to parallel and correlate when you're looking at a bunch of these different things. Where again, if you can start to see exactly the situational moment that starts to create excess moisture in that system, you have done a solid favor for everybody. So here we are, somehow we have driven to the center of this nucleus where what we're doing is touching all of these customers and helping them add value, right? And so I would implore all of you to figure out how to get to the center, or at least get to a point where you are providing value and information to as many nodes as possible into a connected ecosystem like the IoT can generate for you. I admit that I sometimes have a propensity to make things seem a lot easier than they can be, and the IoT is not devoid of problems, headaches, uphill battles, and all of that. I feel like I've actually lost a little bit of hair over the last few years because of this, but that's not to mean that we can't get through some of these issues, and we've already done it ourselves, right? But just some things to keep in mind as you consider how this actually moves to deployment in your worlds is managing customer expectations is everything. If you would come to my office, you would probably see a couple of visuals that I write of just like how we actually drive value to the customer. And if the customer is the bullseye, our biggest barrier to the customer is not competition. It's not our ability to deliver good products. It is, can we integrate into their specific system? The integration piece is the giant moat that will prohibit and slow down the IoT. Because again, all the verticality of the background means you do your system a certain way, and you do your system a certain way, and you do your system a certain way. And I guess what, people? We are not doing good enough to get new standardizations up and in place for all of this, right? And a perfect case example of this is in a matter of 3 days at the beginning of last year, we had one big reseller of equipment want to deploy our solutions, and they say, it just has to be cellular because we want to do shadow IoT projects, because we want to avoid IT departments, right? Because we can come in and deploy cellular devices, and the IT department doesn't even have to know that we're there for the factory floor. I was like, okay, that's fair. I think that's actually a really great idea. In the same couple days later, same conversation, big multinational company says, we have now banned cellular IoT devices globally, worldwide, because we don't want shadow IoT projects happening on the shop floor, that we want and need everything to systematize through an IT department. Therein lies the problem with the IoT, right? And so it is something to consider, right? How do you have the resources, either on staff or in partners, that can help you get through that integration boondoggle to actually get solutions on site? And I see some of you in here shaking your head because you've experienced at this point that says, well, in order to do this, it's got to be this certain way, or it's got to get into my CMMS system, or can your data talk to this person's data over here, and all of that. Now, I can tell you, I believe that it's already gotten better and better, and it will continue to get better. I do believe that we're not that far away from most factory floors having dedicated networks just for IoT. We're already starting to see that, right? So now we're not getting on the same networks as the accounting department and the R&D department and all of that. Cellular technology will continue to get cheaper. Moore's Law, I believe in it. Every 6 months, technology gets, incrementally better and a lot cheaper, So we always say, if you don't like what's out there now, just wait 6 months and it'll probably get a little bit better. Satellite technology, all of that. So, but I also would tell you and implore you that the IoT is a speed game, And so what I mean by that is what's unique about the IoT in a way is especially if you're in the hardware side, right? Historically, capital purchases, that asset that I sell to you is as valuable as it's going to be to you day one, and then it depreciates over time. With the IoT, that gets flipped upside down because of machine learning and predictive analytics. So that asset that I sell to you day one, that smart asset, is as least valuable as it will be to you day one, and it will get incrementally more value and actually transformationally more valuable to you over time, the more that it sits and understands your environment, your fluid environment, your pump environment, your systems environment. And so now, let's say that device technology, let's say that sensing device sunsets in 5 or 7 years, okay? My product that used to be a touch it, feel it, has now become an experience. I have all of this data that is now integrated into that customer. And so if you're a competitor of mine, good luck coming in with better, faster, cheaper in 7 years and starting that customer all over again on a new machine learning journey with their sensing equipment and assets. So it's something to consider, right? Is that, and now you can come in at year 5 or year 6 and be like, hey, let's keep this going. Let's bring in the next iteration and all of that. So when we all think about monetization, there's a big market share play here because I think we now have more ability to block and tackle and create higher barriers to entry for the value that we're providing to our customers based on how quickly and early we can get into this space. So, I go back and forth. Usually they say fast second is the first winner. I don't know about that with the IoT at this point. So just something to consider with that. I talked a little bit about the sandbox coming over. The connectivity and security piece falls exactly into what I'm saying, that customers are going to continue to get really hyper aware of, what is device level security, what encryption level, where's my data going, who owns it, all that kind of stuff. Those conversations are coming, if you're not already having them already. And so you just need to make sure that either on your team or in partnership in that ecosystem that you have people that can do that for you, or be that for you as well. Okay, so to kind of fully circle the wagons here, again, my declaration to you all is to get out of the chaos. There's more information now. There's more tactful and tactical information now than ever on how to actually do this thing called IoT, right? And my chuckle with this is I'm a person that call a spade a spade. I go back to, I spoke at the Automate conference in Chicago last spring, and I was teaching an introductory to, the IoT type of lecture. I had a great turnout. And my big philosophy is I'm like, hey, on this whole Industry 4.0 thing, can we just make sure we do Industry 3.5 really, really, really well before we, go jump willy-nilly into the future? Kid you not, literally in the room right next to me, the CEO of Universal Robotics was doing a presentation on Industry 5.0. And therein lies the problem, right? And so, fortunately we can start to get out of the chaos at this point. There is sensing technology out there. There are great platforms. There's device security that's continuing to be implemented. And so again, this is puzzle to be put together at this point. Go and find your pieces, your partners, and start to put all that together. So to wrap things up here, I put this up here because it's almost lunchtime and I wanted to harass you guys, a little bit. No, but what this visual means to me is, again, it's the easiest thing I can think of how to stack your data. Right? It's a really easy representation on how am I layering data and information and partners on top of each other to honestly get the best, most edible experience. It tastes good, it feels good, and so kind of another visual to leave with at this point is how are you stacking your burger, your sandwich, or your vegan burger, or whatever it may need to be to ultimately drive the most value there.